A 5-2 win over the league leaders, a warning shot over NORAD, and maybe, just maybe, news returning to Facebook in Canada. Let's get into it. It's Thursday, January 29th, 2026, and here in Ottawa, it's a deep freeze. Expect a high around negative 14 degrees Celsius and a low near negative 27 degrees Celsius, with no snow expected. The Ottawa Senators just handed the Colorado Avalanche their third loss in 4 games, with a statement 5-2 victory. Nick Cousins, Greig, Claude Giroux, Brady Tkachuk, and Tim Stutzle all found the back of the net, with James Reimer stopping 16. Colorado pushed hard in the third. Valeri Nichushkin capitalized on a misplay to tie it, but Ottawa punched right back just 17 seconds later, and then iced it with empty netters from Tkachuk and Stutzle. Giroux's tally was his 10th of the year. Artem Zub quietly chipped in 2 assists, and Stutzle had a goal and a helper. If you're keeping an eye on the standings, that's the kind of win that sharpens the trade deadline debate. As Julian McKenzie argued, if the Sens are within a few points of a wild card, they should lean buyer, provided they have a clear plan for goaltending. Flexibility is key, but the message from a game like this group can hang with anyone when the details are right. Staying local, CBC's This is Ottawa, hosted by Robin Bresnahan, keeps zeroing in on the questions that shape daily life here, like how high commercial rents are squeezing independent shops, or why a late-night lineup at the Elgin Street Diner is a civic ritual. New episodes drop every Monday, and if you care about the bones of the city, small businesses, transit hiccups, neighborhood quirks, it's worth your commute time. Those small business questions tie into a national story about where we spend our money. Amid ongoing trade tensions with the U.S., more Canadians are choosing homegrown products, partly out of patriotism, partly out of protest. In BC, demand for American goods reportedly dropped 40% over the past year. But there's a disconnect. Only about 15% of Canadians' purchases actually happen at small businesses, even though local dollars go further. Roughly 66 cents of every dollar stays in the community, compared to about 11 cents at big box chains. That kind of multiplier can keep a main street alive. Still, small shops here face tougher tax burdens than peers across the border in Washington state, and there's concern that the initial momentum to buy Canadian may be fading as people tune out U.S. political noise. All of this is unfolding while Canada, the U.S., and Mexico gear up for a review of CUSMA, the North American Trade Pact, and look for ways to blunt the sting of tariffs. Which brings us to the platforms where we actually see news about all this. Ottawa says it's open to talking with Meta about bringing news back to Facebook and Instagram, even as the CUSMA review looms. Meta pulled news in Canada after the 2023 Online News Act, which requires tech giants to compensate publishers. Washington has flagged that law and the Online Streaming Act as trade irritants affecting digital providers. Canada hasn't disclosed negotiating details, but U.S. officials are signaling they want those issues addressed in the review. If a path is found, it could reconnect millions of Canadians with local reporting in their feeds, without undermining the principle that journalism has value. On the defense front, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra raised eyebrows by warning that NORAD operations may need to change if Canada doesn't proceed with purchasing 88 F-35 fighter jets, suggesting the U.S. could increase aerial operations in Canadian airspace. He also nodded to Arctic realities. Canada helping build U.S. icebreakers could, down the line, enable actions that complicate our sovereignty claims. The memory here is real. Back in 1985, the U.S. Coast Guard transited the Northwest Passage without Canada's permission. Former National Security Advisor Vincent Rigby says, "Don't overinterpret the ambassador's remarks as formal policy, but don't ignore them either." The subtext is clear. The Arctic is heating up geopolitically as the climate warms physically, and capabilities, fighters, icebreakers, surveillance, translate into leverage. Meanwhile, Canadian firms are under scrutiny for ties to U.S. immigration enforcement. Hootsuite, based in Vancouver, is facing protests over a Department of Homeland Security contract for social media services signed in 2024 through a third-party partner, reportedly worth up to $2.8 million U.S. Advocacy groups want the company to cancel the deal and apologize amid backlash over immigration and customs enforcement operations in Minnesota, where agent-involved shootings of civilians drew national outrage. The Jim Pattison Group is also under the microscope, as DHS plans to convert one of its Virginia properties into an ice processing facility. Local officials say they didn't initiate the project and are reviewing zoning. Beyond the headlines, this is a live debate about the role Canadian companies and our tech sector play in U.S. enforcement, data, and AI-driven monitoring. Economically, the Bank of Canada held its benchmark rate at 2.25%, signaling a slow recovery from tariff shocks, but warning that uncertainty remains unusually high heading into the CUSMA talks and amid broader geopolitical risks. The central bank also cautioned that if exemptions for CUSMA-compliant goods were pulled back, Canada's economy could weaken. South of the border, the U.S. Federal Reserve also held at 3.6% after 3 cuts last year, emphasizing steady growth in jobs while looking for inflation to drift closer to 2%. Political pressure on the Fed hasn't gone away, and those geopolitical risks aren't abstract. The Middle East is tense as U.S. naval forces reposition and Iranian officials brace for possible military action. Protests inside Iran have battered the currency and, by some accounts, led to thousands of deaths, with Washington warning Tehran against violence toward demonstrators. At the same time, trade rhetoric is heating up again. President Trump has threatened 100% tariffs on Canadian goods over a China deal Ottawa is pursuing, even as North American partners head into CUSMA negotiations. Prime Minister Mark Carney's public criticism of U.S. trade policy has drawn rebukes from U.S. officials, including Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who suggested the comments could complicate talks. The administration still says it supports trade agreements, but continues to question CUSMA's relevance, an unnerving stance for exporters, farmers, and anyone with a mortgage tied to confidence in the outlook. If all this feels like a lot to track, former UN Ambassador Bob Rae would likely say, that's the job for Canadians. In a recent keynote at Massey College, he reflected on growing up in Washington, D.C. in the late 1950s and early 60s, delivering papers, competing in a spelling bee, and watching history unfold as the civil rights movement gathered force and John F. Kennedy was elected. Those early glimpses of how parties, culture, and power intersect in America shaped his view of our longest, most important relationship. His message lands today. Understanding U.S. politics isn't optional for Canada. It's essential, whether we're talking defense, digital platforms, trade rules, or the price of groceries. Back to where we started, on the ice. Ottawa's win over the Avs shows what a confident, structured Sens team can do. If they stay within striking distance of a wild card, adding smartly at the deadline and getting clarity in goal could turn meaningful March games into meaningful April ones. Before we go, your quick Ottawa weather one more time. A high near -14 degrees Celsius, a low around -27 degrees Celsius, and no snow expected. Layer up. I'm glad you spent part of your day with us. If you've got a story tip from a small business battling rent to a rink that's buzzing, send it our way. New episodes drop all week, and if you want more city deep dives, check out This is Ottawa on Monday.